Denzel played Burley in a movie. Chase shot Wade and went to jail. Lytle killed a man in the ring. Coco Kid and Holman fought 13 times. Booker's body shots nearly ended Archie's life. Lloyd gave LaMotta his worst beating. Johnson broke the color barrier. Ali, the greatest of all time. Mayweather, the best ever.
The best ever.
8 men with over 760 wins, avoided by the Sugar Ray Robinsons and Henry Armstrongs. This is the untold story of Black Murderers Row. Charles Dwayne Burley, known to the world as Charley Burley, born September 6, 1917 in Bessemer, Pennsylvania. Burley is the most recognizable member of what is today called the Black Murderers Row. He was known for his unorthodox angles, consistent jab, elusive defense, and quick counterpunching. Archie Moore called him as slick as lard and twice as greasy. From 1938 to 1947, Burley fought the Black Murderers Row 18 times, traveling from Baltimore to San Francisco. What each man shared is their exceptional ability in the boxing ring and the fact that none of them ever got an opportunity to fight for a world title in boxing. Listen, this is the story of Charles Dwayne Burley. His father was a black coal miner, and his mother was a white Irish immigrant. In 1925, Charley's father was killed in an industrial accident, and his family would move to Pittsburgh. At just 12 years old, Burley entered the local boys' club boxing ring as a lightweight, winning city, state, and national junior boxing titles, along with the Golden Gloves title. Charley had not just passion in the squared circle for boxing, but on the diamond playing baseball where he excelled. The Homestead Grays, a great and highly respected team in the Negro Leagues, offered Burley a contract. Shortly after, another offer was on the table for Charley to fight in the 1936 Summer Olympics, held in Berlin, Germany. But he declined the invitation in protest of Nazi Germany and their regime. This was the same Olympic Games that African-American track star Jesse Owens dominated with 4 gold medals, as Adolf Hitler watched in disbelief. Instead, Burley opted to fight in the Worker Games in Republican Spain ahead of World War II. The games were canceled due to the Spanish Civil War. Charley Burley would go on to make his professional debut on September 29, 1936, against George Liggins at the Moose Temple in Pittsburgh, winning by knockout. On August 22, 1938, Burley defeated Black Murderers Row Herbert Lewis Hardwick, aka Coco Kid, for the World Colored Welterweight Championship by unanimous decision. Burley floored Coco Kid 3 times and defeated him decisively. Charley was now ranked number 1 from August to November of 1939, and word around the East Coast boxing gyms was Burley was a major threat for the welterweight king, Henry Armstrong. Armstrong ignored him. Burley wasn't connected or protected. Armstrong was close to Joe Louis, and Black Murderers Row Holman Williams was a mentor to Joe Louis. And in October 1940, Burley was ranked number 1, and Coco Kid was ranked number 2. Armstrong ignored them both and fought number 3, Fritzy Zivic, instead. Burley had already beaten him twice. Charley said, "I used to get down on my knees and pray that I'd get a title shot. Writers speculated if Holman Williams was put in front of Charley to protect Armstrong, the term they called a policeman, when someone would be sent in front of a threat. On December 1st, 1939, he battled Holman Williams in the first of a 7-fight rivalry. The fight took place in New Orleans at the Coliseum Arena. Burley dropped Williams 3 times in the 4th round, but Williams took control and won a decision. To begin his impressive 1942, Charley defeated both Shorty Hogue and Big Boy Hogue, the notable boxing brothers. He stopped Shorty and retired Big Boy. On March 13, 1942, at the Armory in Minnesota, Burley, having issues securing an opponent, fought a heavyweight, J.D. Turner, who outweighed him by 70 pounds. Turner said after the fight, quote, "That little son of a gun hit me with a left hook and I woke up in the dressing room." Burley turned his face to raw beefsteak. JD couldn't answer the bell, and Burley won by TKO in round 7. The following month, Charley Burley ran into Sugar Ray Robinson in the lobby of a hotel in New York. Charley was fighting Phil McQuillan on April 20th, 1942. When Burley and Robinson wound up on the same card April 30th, 1942, a week later, at the Minneapolis Armory, Charley KO'd Sammy Wilson in 2 rounds, as did Ray KO Dick Banner in 2 rounds. When Sugar Ray watched Charley Burley's performance from ringside, he told his manager, quote, "I'm too pretty to fight Charley Burley." Burley would go on to win the rematch against Holman Williams in February of 1942 at the Armory in Minneapolis by unanimous decision. The 3rd fight took place on June 23, 1942, at Crosley Field in Cincinnati. Burley would also win again by decision. During his series with Holman Williams, Burley also fought in May and June of 1942 against Ezzard Charles, 35 days apart. Burley lost both fights by decision. On August 14, 1942, at the Victory Arena in New Orleans, Charley defeated Holman Williams for the World Colored Middleweight title, winning by TKO in 9 rounds. A couple months later, on October 16, 1942, Holman returned the favor, winning a decision at Municipal Auditorium in New Orleans and capturing the World Colored Middleweight title. On December 11, 1942, he lost the split decision to Black Murderers Row Lloyd Marshall at Legion Stadium in Hollywood. He would later say that Marshall was one of his toughest fights. On February 19, 1943, he defeated Black Murderers Row Jack Chase by decision at Legion Stadium in Hollywood. On March 3, 1943, he defeated Black Murderers Row Aaron Wade by decision at the Auditorium in Oakland, fighting with a damaged right hand. A rematch with Coco Kid at Pelican Stadium in New Orleans on April 19, 1943, ended in a draw. And when Burley rematched Aaron Wade March 24, 1944, he won a decision at the Coliseum in San Diego. On April 6, 1944, Burley defeated Black Murderers Row Jack Chase again in a rematch, winning the California State Middleweight Championship by KO in round 9. A few weeks later, Burley was working at an aircraft factory in his then hometown of San Diego. He got a call to be a late replacement to fight Archie Moore. On April 21, 1944, with a busted eardrum, he finished his shift, got on a bus, and headed to Legion Stadium in Hollywood. Burley outclassed and defeated Archie Moore by decision, dropping him in the 1st, 3rd, and 4th rounds. Moore, who reflected years later, said, "Charley Burley, pound for pound the greatest fighter I ever faced. Charley gave me a licking and sent me back to school. I learned more in our fight than any other. That man was fantastic. He could lean away from a punch, be clear off balance, and knock your brains out with a counter." On September 11, 1944, Burley fought Jack Chase for a third time, winning by TKO and capturing the California State Middleweight Championship again. On July 11, 1945, he fought his final fight against Holman Williams, ending their rivalry. Williams would win a decision at the Civic Stadium in Buffalo. The Burley-Williams rivalry had ended in an even split between 1939 and 1945. Burley won 3, Williams won 3, and 1 was ruled a no contest in 1943 due to inactivity in the ring from both fighters. On August 20th, 1945, he defeated Aaron Wade for a third time at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, winning a decision. The Pittsburgh Press wrote about Burley's hard time securing the world champions of his era, quote, "Every good middleweight around has been offered a fat purse to step in the ring with Burley, and each one in turn has nixed the proposition." This included the King, Sugar Ray Robinson. Burley was willing to fight him for nothing. Quote, "They can give him my purse too," he said. Robinson, said the Pittsburgh Press, quote, "prefers to keep his reputation and let Burley and the local promoters keep the $20,000 they offered for the night's work." Late in 1946, he defeated Black Murderers Row Bert Lytell in Pennsylvania by decision. And when they rematched February 17, 1947 in Baltimore, Lytell returned the favor and won a decision over Burley. He found himself broke in 1947 as he couldn't get a fight. But he was respected in cities like Los Angeles, where they treated him, quote, "like Jesus Christ." Burley was forced to return home and work as a part-time garbage man in Pittsburgh. He only fought once in 1948. Boxing legends and world champions Billy Conn, Marcel Cerdan, and Sugar Ray Robinson sidestepped the slick Pittsburgh warrior, leaving his ultimate glory out of reach. Sugar Ray Robinson had even signed for a May 1946 fight with Charley Burley, but raised the price to close to $25,000 when he wanted an out. When Sports Illustrated asked if he would have beaten Sugar Ray Robinson, Charley Burley said, quote, "I wish I had my chance. I was offered but wouldn't take no dives. I was told I could fight Sugar Ray Robinson 3 times, but I had to lose the first. I wouldn't do it. I never took no money, and that's the God's truth. It wasn't my style." Sugar Ray once said, "Anyone who would pursue a fight with Burley would have to be crazy. He was a tremendously dangerous fighter. I have to admit, I have my doubts that I could have licked him in my prime years." Eddie Futch, who trained Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, Larry Holmes, and Trevor Berbick, 4 of the 5 men who defeated Muhammad Ali, stated that Burley, quote, "was the finest all-around fighter he ever saw." Burley's final fight was July 22, 1950 against Pilar Bastidas in Peru. He won by decision. Burley was never KO'd in 98 fights. He had 50 knockouts and fought fighters from welterweight to heavyweight. In 1976, he was still working as a garbage man at the age of 59. And by 1981, he was retired and remarked, "Nobody cares about me anymore." Soon after, the Charley Burley Award was created by a local organization for the outstanding boxer of the district's Silver Mittens final. Burley would present the trophy. Magazines recognized him as one of the greatest punchers of all time. He was inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame in 1983 and World Boxing Hall of Fame in 1987. He was posthumously enshrined in the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1992. In 2008, the Burley family received the key to the city of Pittsburgh, and August 5th was proclaimed Charley Burley Day. Playwright August Wilson, who grew up idolizing Charley in Pittsburgh, who went on to win the Pulitzer Prize, described Burley as the first image he had of a man. Wilson said, "He used to live across the street, and I'd go over there and watch TV. Charley would take his knuckles, rub them on your head and say, 'Hey, champ,' and it'd hurt like hell, but you couldn't let him know it hurt." When August Wilson wrote the popular stage play turned movie Fences, the main character Troy was based on Charley Burley. The setting was the backyard of a house in Pittsburgh, and the plot follows a former Negro League baseball player who is now a bitter garbage man. The parallels with Burley are clear. The main character, Troy, was played by two icons, James Earl Jones in 1987 and Denzel Washington in 2016. The play and film won the Pulitzer Prize in 1987 and Tony Award for Best Play. Burley finished his career with 83 wins, 12 losses, 2 draws, and 1 no contest. On October 16, 1992, at the age of 75, Charles Dwayne Burley passed away, fading into the history books as one of the kings of Black Murderers Row until now. Herbert Lewis Hardwick, known as Coco Kid, born on May 2, 1914 in Puerto Rico. As he mastered his style, his height, and his reach, he became hard to hit defensively. Using angles offensively, he fought behind a long, strong jab. There was confusion around his ethnicity. While some thought he was Cuban or Puerto Rican, one manager told the Baltimore Sun, "Coco Kid is as much an American Negro as Joe Louis." Listen, this is the story of Herbert Lewis Hardwick. The journey begins with his father, Hardwick Sr., who was a U.S. Navy messman. And in 1918, he was aboard the USS Cyclops when it disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. The U.S. Navy launched an exhaustive search at sea and a 10-year-long investigation with no answers. Of 306 men on board, none ever turned up. No debris was found. No distress call was communicated. 1 month later, the United States government released the names of the entire crew and passengers to American newspapers. On April 15, 1918, Hardwick's mother read the Atlanta Constitution newspaper, where she found her husband, Hardwick Lewis Herbert, among the lost. Hardwick's mother wrote to the U.S. military for assistance, as their family had not a penny to their name and were living in poverty. Lewis Sr. had applied for war risk insurance before the voyage. In case he died, the family would receive $47 on the 1st of every month. In 1926, at the age of 12, Hardwick's mother passed away from the effects of malnutrition. She was only in her 20s. Herbert's paternal grandmother took custody of him, and he grew up around Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, Georgia, which was called, quote, the richest Negro street in the world by John Wesley Dobbs. Martin Luther King Jr. was born a few blocks east of where Hardwick lived. A family friend, E.A. Robinson, took Hardwick to a boxing gym and soon became his manager and legal guardian. On May 27, 1929, Hardwick made his first professional boxing debut at just the age of 14 years old versus Kid Moon. He won the fight, and the purse was 50 cents. He gave it all to his grandmother. In 1932, he started going by the name Cocoa Kid as a tribute to the Cuban Kid Chocolate, who was the king at lightweight. Between April and December 1932, he fought 17 fights. In 1933, he fought 21 fights. And in 1934, he fought 24 fights. Herbert Hardwick is on record using the term smoke in 1933 when he fought a veteran and former world champion, Lewis Kaplan. Most pundits thought he was in over his head. He was still a teenager. Cocoa Kid said to a reporter, quote, Lord, the way some people talk, you'd think I needed sympathy. It's Kaplan who needs it. He was good once, and he still may be good, but I intend to prove I'm better. Just watch my smoke. The next morning, the headlines were that Cocoa Kid gave Kid Kaplan a beating. The Cocoa Kid smoke sent Kaplan into retirement 3 days later. On May 8, 1933, Cocoa Kid hit Jimmy Lytle with a wide right that turned Lytle around in a daze. Instead of going for the finish, Cocoa Kid allowed him to recover and ended up losing by decision. A sports writer named Paul Gallico, who retired from his disgust with boxing, penned an editorial entitled, quote, Farewell to the Sport in 1938. Gallico stated in his farewell that 8 out of 10 professional boxing matches between a black man and a white man, the dices were loaded. Black boxers had to carry white opponents. The black boxers were handcuffed. Gallico said the directive often came from their own managers, and without handcuffs, black boxers couldn't expect to win closely contested fights. They had to dominate to hopefully get a fair shake. Gallico said, quote, white people grow weary of seeing a Negro triumph too often. Historians speculate if Cocoa Kid was often handcuffed. He won every round of the fight in many of his wins. From his losses, many of them were closely contested. When ambitious black boxers allowed white fighters to go the distance, they proved to be cooperative with managers. This meant more fights and possibly better opportunities like title shots. No one got knocked out and no one took a dive. On April 26, 1935, in a rematch against Lytle, a crowd of 1,000 protested the decision for Lytle. The next morning in the newspapers, Cocoa Kid revealed that Lytle's manager, Lou Viscusi, came to his house, quote, to try to get me to throw the fight to Lytle for $100. On May 2nd, Cocoa Kid testified against Viscusi, saying he pretended to be an auto salesman to get into his house before offering him a bribe to lose to Lytle. Cocoa Kid told him no, and Viscusi told him he wouldn't win even if he declined. Viscusi testified he did show up to Cocoa Kid's house with 2 other men, but to ensure that Hardwick would make the contracted weight or forfeit. More than likely, this was an intimidation tactic. The State Athletic Commissioner of Connecticut suspended Viscusi, and Viscusi resigned as Lytle's manager without disputing the ruling. Coco Kid had done a no-no at the time, reporting a bribe. Some speculate that this could be a reason Herbert Lewis Hardwick never received a world title shot. In September 1935, world champion Barney Ross ducked the title fight and the non-title fight with Coco Kid. His manager said, quote, "The Negro is too tall and he's not a draw." In 1937, promoter Lou Fisher offered Ross $3,000 to fight Coco Kid. Ross never answered. On August 22, 1938, Coco Kid fought Black Murderers Row legend Charley Burley in Pennsylvania. He lost the colored welterweight title by decision over 15 rounds. On March 9, 1939, he defeated another Black Murderers Row legend, Eddie Booker, in Connecticut by decision. By 1940, Herbert Hardwick had over 150 fights and was pushing to face Henry Armstrong, who defeated Ross for the title. Henry Armstrong was offered $5,000, $10,000, and $15,000 to face Coco Kid, but his team never accepted. The National Boxing Association intended to make the winner of Coco Kid versus Phil Furr the mandatory for Henry Armstrong. And when Coco Kid beat Furr, they rescinded their directive. And then Furr got a title shot at Armstrong. In October, Coco Kid was ranked number 1, while Armstrong chose to fight the number 3 ranked Fritzy Zivic instead. The Maryland Boxing Commission was so disgusted, they refused to recognize Henry Armstrong as champion, stating, "If Armstrong intends to limit his fights to second and third raters, there is no reason for Maryland to recognize him." Herbert Lewis Hardwick fought one of the greatest rivalries in boxing history with Holman Williams. It started down in New Orleans in March 13, 1936, and they would go on to fight 13 times up until May 14, 1945. Coco Kid won 8 times, while Holman Williams won 3 times. The other 2 times were a draw. Coco Kid tended to dominate Williams with his reach, even though they were fairly similar in height. On April 19, 1943, Herbert Lewis Hardwick got his rematch with Charley Burley down in New Orleans at the Pelican Stadium. They fought to a draw. Coco Kid reported to the Navy recruiting station in Los Angeles on November 5, 1943, to serve in World War II. Ironically, he was a mess man just like his father in World War I. However, it was short-lived. Hardwick failed to serve out his 2-year commitment as expected due to medical reasons. He was out of the military by June 12, 1944. He was diagnosed with dementia pugilistica. On October 20, 1944, he fought Black Murderers Row Jack Chase at the Legion Stadium in Hollywood and won by decision. On November 13, 1944, he fought Black Murderers Row Aaron Wade and lost at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco. A few weeks later, on November 24, 1944, he was set to fight Oakland Billy Smith when referee Frankie Brown heard that Coco Kid was going to take a dive. The rumor was getting around San Francisco's Civic Auditorium before the main event. When the odds flipped in Smith's favor, writer Eddie Mueller felt he knew exactly what would happen next. When Coco Kid went down from a light left hook, the referee didn't begin the count. Instead, he told Coco Kid to get up and warned him he wouldn't get paid if he threw this fight. In the third round, Smith put Hardwick down again. Brown told him to get up again. And when Coco Kid went down a third time, Brown called the fight off and declared it a no contest. The crowd cheered for the referee and booed Coco Kid out of the building. Referee Frankie Brown wrote a report requesting for Coco Kid's purse to be withheld and he be banned from fighting in California for the rest of his career. On December 6, 1944, at a hearing, Coco Kid said his bad performance was because of his mother and his issues with his ex-wife Maria. She was suing for custody of his children. It was then determined that his $600 purse be forfeited, and the commission unanimously voted to suspend Coco Kid from fighting in California. On September 17, 1944, he fought Archie Moore at the Coliseum in Baltimore and was KO'd in 8 rounds. Coco Kid also fought Black Murderers Row Bert Lytell 3 times, including twice in 1946. He lost all 3 fights. Coco Kid fought his final fight on August 24, 1948, losing a decision in New Jersey to Bobby Mann. Later, Hardwick was hired by Sugar Ray Robinson as a sparring partner while Ray was at his peak. The camp was in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey, and Coco Kid floored Sugar Ray with a right hand to the chin in the second round of one of their sessions. Sugar Ray was later signed to fight Gene Burton. Burton's suspension in another state caused the Houston promoter to then set up Robinson to face an aging Coco Kid on April 17, 1949. Sugar Ray Robinson never showed up. The deputy boxing commissioner recommended Robinson face immediate suspension until he fulfilled the contract or paid the promoters back. Quote, "This runout is certainly no credit to Robinson." Ray Robinson agreed to reschedule for May 24th, but never showed up. Coco Kid finished his illustrious boxing career with over 250 fights, 179 wins, 58 losses, and 11 draws. Despite being ranked number 1 and in the top 10 for over 12 years at lightweight, welterweight, and middleweight, he never once got a single world title shot. At the age of 44, he was seen wandering the streets of New York, suffering from the punches he sustained in over 250 boxing matches. His military discharge papers and social security card were stolen, which made it even harder for him to get VA assistance. In 1959, he was admitted to Chicago State Hospital, known as Dunning Asylum. Coco Kid was transferred to the neuropsychiatric ward of the VA hospital in North Chicago, where he died in 1966. Herbert Lewis Hardwick is buried at Wood National Cemetery in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, alongside Buffalo Soldiers. He faded into the history books of boxing as one of the kings and legends of Black Murderers Row. Until now. Calvin Coolidge Lytle, aka Bert Lytell, described as 5'8" of bitter coffee that no one would drink. He was simply too black, too strong, and too honest. A southpaw who found boxing in the military. As a professional, he incidentally killed a man in the ring, a fight that haunted him for the rest of his life. Listen, this is the story of Calvin, aka Bert. Born Calvin Coolidge Lytle on January 24, 1924 in Victoria, Texas. Calvin's father was an auto mechanic and named him after then-President Calvin Coolidge, the 30th President of the United States of America. Calvin found his southpaw stance at 11 years old when he got into a fight with another kid. Years later, he explained the situation. Quote, "The kid was a lefty. I was a righty. He gave me such a licking, I decided if I ever got into another fight, I'd fight like him. So I turned around. I bat left-handed. In football, I pass with my left hand. I'm left-handed all the way now." At 17, Calvin became a member of the Civilian Conservation Corps, living in segregated barracks in El Paso, Texas. He worked outdoors doing unskilled labor, earning $30 a month. He'd keep $5 and send $25 home. On November 30th, 1941, his father was in a fatal car accident, changing his life forever. Calvin became a ward of C.W. Anderson, a judge in San Antonio who got him a job serving soda and ice cream. On March 8, 1942, shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Calvin found himself in a Navy recruiting station in Houston, Texas. Judge Anderson signed Calvin up to become a messman in the Naval Reserves. On his papers, the reason he enlisted read, quote, "To serve my country." Calvin was sent to Norfolk, Virginia for messman training, which included 8 weeks of boot camp, how to properly shine shoes and silverware, and how to set white officers' tables. In the U.S. Navy at the time, black men were predominantly relegated to being messmen, seen as the lowest on the ship's hierarchy. They often were used only to serve white officers. From May to August of 1942, Calvin was stationed at the U.S. Naval Air Station in the Panama Canal Zone. Calvin played baseball on his off days before boxing found him. One rainy day, a 6-foot white man was waiting for sparring work when a coach spotted Calvin and asked him to come try the boxing gloves on. Calvin proceeded to batter and knock down the experienced boxer with no knowledge of who he was. When Calvin exited the ring, the coach revealed to him that he'd been boxing with former middleweight champion Billy Seuss. He signed up for the Navy boxing team that Thursday and had his first fight by Sunday. He fought a 2-minute 3-rounder and won by knockout. The military was no smooth time for Calvin Coolidge, who was stationed in British Guiana in September 1942 and instantly found himself in the brig. 5 days in solitary confinement for incidents of disorderly conduct. Over the next several months, he would spend more time in the brig being punished for incidents of stealing a Navy truck, absence from duty, neglect from duty, and falsehood. Calvin was aboard USS Surprise, where he was punished for skipping watch duty, profanity, leaving the ship without authority, insubordination, and possession of another man's Liberty card. Calvin was disciplined by his captain 8 times. By November 1943, Calvin was in the brig again of a U.S. naval station in New York. And by March of 1944, Calvin's enlistment expired and he was given a, quote, "bad conduct discharge" and not recommended for re-enlistment. Calvin received none of the benefits of a Navy man. After disembarking in New York, he received no pension and no cemetery plot. Like his father, Calvin found himself working in a car garage in Brooklyn near Kings Highway. He spoke of his boxing past and was linked up with Bernie Bernstein, who took him to the historic Stillman's boxing gym. He was thrown in the ring with a professional middleweight to see if he could really fight, just like he was when he began boxing in the Navy. Calvin beat the middleweight up badly. Bernie and Sammy Aronson turned him professional soon after. Tiny Patterson served as his manager. Calvin was known as a fast, clever, sharp-shooting southpaw, a slick ringman with a constant jab and swift movement. He was known for his incredible jaw. Calvin Coolidge Lytle made his pro debut July 17, 1944 in Newark, New Jersey at the Meadowbrook Bowl against Artie Town. At 20 years old, he was introduced as the Chocolate Kid of Cuba. Herbert Lewis Hardwick had taken Calvin under his wing at Stillman's boxing gym. He never went by his birth name, Calvin Coolidge. Calvin lost his first fight by decision against Town, who was a stablemate of Sugar Ray Robinson. A week later, he dominated Joe Curcio and Lou Perez, who was known as the Fighting Clown of Puerto Rico. Calvin never went by the nickname Chocolate Kid again. Instead, he went from Lytle to Lytell, probably an ode to the silent film actor at the time, Bert Lytell. In 1944, he was introduced in newspapers as Bert Lytell, who made his name in California. Newspapers from Boston to New Orleans to San Francisco have contradicting origin stories for Calvin. Some say he was born in Fresno, California. Others say he was born in Oakland, California. The truth is that Calvin Coolidge Lytle was born in Victoria, Texas. In April of 1945, he fought the Raging Bull Jake LaMotta at the Boston Garden. Many sports writers and fans present at the fight believed he won, but LaMotta got the 10th round split decision as the crowd booed on. Bert entered into the top 10 rankings at middleweight, and promoter Rip Valentini from Boston announced he'd set up a contractual agreement for Calvin to fight the great Sugar Ray Robinson July 23, 1945 at Fenway Park. But then soon after claimed Robinson ran out. Robinson was offered a $15,000 guarantee to fight Bert for the Negro Middleweight Championship, but he passed. Sugar Ray was always vocal that many promoters of the time would take his interest in making a fight as him agreeing to a fight, but that was not the case. So Bert and many in the boxing media continued to press for a rematch with Jake LaMotta. Instead, Sugar Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta fought for a 5th time. He couldn't secure either fighter. Bert would travel by bus and train, staying in rundown motels and eating free meals at YMCAs, taking small purses. On March 25, 1946, he fought his former mentor, Herbert Lewis Hardwick, aka Coco Kid, and beat him badly. It's said he began to pull his punches due to the punishment. Bert fought another legend of Black Murderers Row, Charley Burley, twice. The first fight in August 1946 was held in Pennsylvania. Burley won by decision in what was described as an anticlimactic fight. Burley accepted a rematch in 1947. The fight was held in Baltimore, Maryland at the Coliseum, and the crowd was left stunned in silence as Bert staggered Burley twice before winning a unanimous 10-round decision. Bert Lytell had a 4-fight rivalry with fellow Black Murderers Row legend Holman Williams. Williams and Lytell fought to a draw in the first fight. Williams would go on to win the rematch, while Lytell won the third fight. On July 4, 1947, Williams-Lytell 4, the tiebreaker, was held at Pelican Stadium in New Orleans, Louisiana. It was a, quote, all-Negro July 4th ring show. Lytell, told the Times-Picayune in New Orleans ahead of the fight, "Those who saw what he did to Coco Kid realize Holman is in for it." Coco Kid was Lytell's mentor from Stillman's boxing gym. Lytell knocked Williams down and out cold flat on his back early in the fight, but Williams was saved by the bell. Bert won the fight by decision. On April 21st, 1948, Bert fought Jackie Darthard at the Milwaukee Auditorium. Bert dropped and battered Jackie until Jackie's body fell limply off his stool heading into round 7 due to the punishment. Jackie was taken to a local hospital where Bert waited anxiously for news. Jackie Darthard was pronounced dead at 8:40 a.m. the next morning. This fight would haunt Lytell for the rest of his life and his boxing career. He began to pull his punches when he had his opponents hurt. Bert and Jake LaMotta had finally scheduled their rematch, but it was given 3 different dates as LaMotta pulled out of each scheduled date for different reasons, from hand injuries to investigations of fight fixing. The top middleweights in Bert's era were LaMotta, Cerdan, Zale, and Rocky Graziano, and none would have been favored to beat Bert Lytell. By December 1948, he went on a light heavyweight campaign in the Caribbean and was now ranked number 1, but never got a shot at the light heavyweight championship. Bert Lytell fought the great Archie Moore twice. July 14, 1947, at the Baltimore Coliseum, he conceded 11 pounds and 2 inches of height. Moore would go on to win the fight by unanimous decision over 10 rounds. Moore vs. Lytell 2, the rematch, took place January 31st, 1950 in Toledo, Ohio. This time, Bert gave up 13 pounds, and Moore once again won the fight by unanimous decision over 10 rounds. The following year, April 16, 1951, at the age of 27, Bert Lytell fought his last prize fight against Clinton Bacon in Washington, D.C. He would lose that fight over a 10-round decision. Bert Lytell didn't realize that he had fought his last fight because he was blackballed from boxing forever. One day he was approached by someone who asked him to take a dive, but he refused to take a dive. At the time, this was common, and fighters had no choice if they wanted to continue to make a living within the business of boxing. As he was in the Navy, Calvin was defiant and believed he always had a choice. He chose not to take dives in boxing. It's important to know that Calvin didn't quit boxing. He wasn't a worn-out fighter. He was a great fighter who never got a shot at a world title or a colored world title. The choice to not take a dive effectively ended his boxing career. Calvin would become a sparring partner for fighters he couldn't seal a prize fight with while he was active, like Sugar Ray Robinson. Bert Lytell's final boxing record reads 102 fights, 71 wins, 23 losses, and 7 draws. He spent his later years living in Oakland and had several more run-ins with the law. On January 26, 1990, Calvin Coolidge Lytle, aka Bert Lytell, passed and faded into boxing history as one of the kings of Black Murderers Row. Until now. Isaiah James Chase, known as Jack Chase, born in Sherman, Texas on January 27, 1914. Isaiah grew up without his father and spent his youth in the juvenile justice system. This is the tumultuous story of Isaiah James Chase. Chase grew up in Colorado and was first arrested at the age of 12. The Denver Post reports that he stole a police car, took it for a short joyride, and ditched it. He was sentenced to attend Colorado State Boys School in 1928 and was released 3 years later. Isaiah was quickly charged with burglary and sentenced back to Colorado State Boys School. He escaped to Denver and was captured and sent back to boys' school with an extension on his sentence. Chase appeared in court 9 times between the ages of 12 and 18. After confessing to a string of boxcar robberies, the judge charged the minor as an adult. He was sentenced to 5 to 10 years at Colorado State Penitentiary. Chase was released in December of 1935, approaching his 22nd birthday. Unlike all the other fighters in Black Murderers Row, Isaiah Jack Chase began boxing while in prison. He reportedly may have had 30 fights within prison, where boxing was popular and accepted. Isaiah Chase made his pro debut January 30th, 1936, a month after being released from prison. He went by the name Young Joe Louis. Escaping and hiding his troubled past is one of the reasons he used so many aliases. Known for speed, swift feet, and an unorthodox style, and a mean, sharp left hand. In the 1930s, he would win the Colorado State title, the Rocky Mountain Regional Middleweight title, and the Rocky Mountain Regional Welterweight titles. In the 1940s, he would win the California State Middleweight and the California State Light Heavyweight titles. On January 7, 1938, at the age of 23, Chase robbed 2 stores in Colorado Springs for a total of $7. He was convicted 4 days later to a sentence of 6 to 8 years. The judge promised him if he ever got charged with a felony again, he'd get a life sentence. On May 27, 1941, Isaiah Chase was released from prison. On June 30th, 1941, he fought Roy Jack Gillespie. The fight was stopped after the first minute of the 6th round. Gillespie was down for a no count in the first, down twice in the second for 2 counts of 9. He collapsed on his stool in the corner after the bout was stopped and died at the Denver General Hospital on July 2nd. Isaiah Chase was arrested again for this fight and put in jail. He was later released after it was revealed that Gillespie had previous brain damage. For the bout, both Chase and Gillespie earned $17. He never fought with the name Young Joe Louis again. Instead, he went by Jack Chase, the name he would use for the rest of his boxing career. When Chase began fighting in California at the Legion Stadium in Hollywood, he sold it out every time and received purses of $1,200 and $2,200. Jack Chase fought Archie Moore 6 times, going 1, 4, and 1 against the legend Moore. On August 2nd, 1943, at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco, Jack Chase beat Moore in their 3rd fight for the USA California State Middleweight title. Jack Chase fought the Black Murderers Row 15 times. On January 11, 1943, Chase beat Eddie Booker at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco and again won the USA California State Middleweight title. Chase fought Charley Burley 3 times and lost all 3. He was knocked out twice. Jack fought Lloyd Marshall 3 times. The first fight on November 8, 1943 was ruled a draw. Chase would go on to rematch Marshall on December 13, 1943 at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco, easily defending his title The fight generated $17,753. Marshall defeated Chase in the third fight. At the end of 1943, Jack Chase was ranked the number 2 middleweight in the world. Life was better. He drove around LA in a 41 Chevy. He owned a record store and he bought a house. On December 26, 1943, Chase was relaxing at the Palace Restaurant on Fillmore Street in San Francisco. He was hanging out with Black Murderers Row Lytle, Tiger Wade, and 2 girls. A gunshot rang out. Wade was hit in the left shoulder. He was bleeding, and he was shot by Jack Chase. Jack Chase said his gun discharged as he reached into his pocket for cigarettes. Wade and his girlfriend confirmed the story. He was arrested and cleared eventually. Aaron Wade had lost the decision to Jack Chase earlier in 1943. He ended up fighting Jack Chase twice after the incident, but was never able to secure a victory. Jack Chase fought Holman Williams 4 times in 1944, but couldn't beat him. Chase fought Herbert Hardwick, aka Coco Kid, on October 20th, 1944 at the Allegiant Stadium in Hollywood. Coco Kid won every round. In 1946, Jack Chase found comfort in reading books, and he had opened his own landscaping business. Though Chase continued to fight, he would show his age from many wars, as his athleticism and quick feet faded. From there, he went to Hollywood, appearing in 2 films, Dear to My Heart in 1948 and The Setup in 1949, considered a noir classic. Chase was married to actress Lillian Randolph from It's a Wonderful Life. He began training Art Aragon. In 1958, he moved to Washington State, continued training before working for Goodwill, driving a truck for the next 14 years. Chase finished his boxing career with 119 fights, 81 wins, 24 losses, and 12 draws. Jack Chase never got a world title shot in boxing. On March 22, 1972, at the age of 58, Isaiah James Chase heart stopped while he was alone at his apartment, fading into boxing history as one of the kings of Black Murderers Row. Until now. Holman Williams, born January 30th, 1915 in Pensacola, Florida, known to many during his era as the most skilled boxer who ever lived. He fought against every member of the Black Murderers Row a total of 36 times. Williams began boxing at Brewster's Boxing Gym after his family relocated to Detroit, Michigan. And by 1932, he'd won the Detroit Golden Gloves and made it to the Featherweight National Amateur Championship final in New York. He lost to Richard Carter. He aspired to compete in the Olympics, but lost the qualifier. Listen to the legendary story of Holman Williams. Holman made his professional boxing debut on August 12, 1932 at State Fairgrounds Arena in Detroit, Michigan. He faced Joe Lynn and won by TKO in round 3. When the iconic boxer Joe Louis entered Detroit's Brewster Gym in 1930, it was Holman Williams who took him under his wing, teaching him boxing's fundamentals. It was Williams who also talked Louis out of quitting boxing for baseball when Joe lost his first amateur fight. Joe Louis admired Holman Williams and described him as a, quote, beautiful boxer. Joe Louis looked out for Williams as their careers went into different trajectories. Louis was considered a king in boxing, while Williams was too dangerous to get an opportunity for a title shot in 2 different weight classes. Trainer Eddie Futch said he often saw Joe Louis delaying his own workout to watch Holman. Louis said he wanted to pick up ideas. Holman Williams was known for his mobility and educated jab, a defensive fighter with dynamite in his right hand. Holman knew throwing punches made opponents tired, and slipping those shots exerted less energy. He had more knockouts early in his career, but hand injuries made his style shift to being an even more mobile fighter and attacking softer spots on his opponent's body due to the wear and tear that his hands received. During that time, fighters couldn't rely on modern medicines and surgeries to repair their hands. On July 2nd, 1935, Williams defeated Baby Tiger Flowers by TKO in round 8 at Comiskey Park in Chicago to win the vacant Negro lightweight title. The fight took place in front of a crowd of 7,500, and Joe Louis presented Williams with the belt. Williams holds the most fights against the notorious Black Murderers Row with a total of 36. Holman Williams established a faithful African-American fan base in New Orleans on Rampart Street at the Coliseum Arena with 3 standout performances. Holman Williams fought Herbert Lewis Hardwick, aka Coco Kid, 13 times. The first fight was on March 13, 1936. Coco Kid made easy work of Holman Williams in the first 2 fights and bragged around New Orleans, where Williams had become a fan favorite, that no black man had ever beat him. When Holman began working with light heavyweight champion John Henry Lewis of Philadelphia, he came into the 3rd fight with a better style and game plan for Coco Kid. He fought from a crouch, rolling, weaving, and slipping the long jab of Coco Kid and banging shots to his body. It was an upset, with 5,700 in attendance, and the people on Rampart celebrated in the streets. In the 4th fight, June 11, 1937, for the colored welterweight title, Williams lost, and his fan base in New Orleans were so mad they stormed the ring. In the 13th fight between Williams and Coco Kid, their final fight, taking place 9 years after their first, Holman used again his patient strategy, waiting until Coco Kid gassed out, and won the fight by decision. Holman Williams went 3-8-2 against Herbert Lewis Hardwick, aka Coco Kid, in classic battles including 2 fights for the World Colored Welterweight Championship, 1 fight in New Orleans in June of 1937, and another in January of 1940 held in Baltimore, Maryland. Coco Kid won both by 15-round decision. Holman Williams versus Herbert Hardwick is considered the greatest boxing rivalry in boxing history. Nothing like it before, and certainly nothing like it since. Holman Williams fought Charley Burley 7 times. He went 3-3-1. No contest. He won the first fight on December 1st, 1939 by decision. On October 16, 1942, Holman Williams defeated Charley Burley by decision over 15 rounds at the Municipal Auditorium in New Orleans. He won the World Colored Middleweight title. Holman and Charley's fight in Hollywood, May 14, 1943, referee Abe Roth declared a no contest after 1 minute of the 10th round due to inactivity. Holman Williams fought Bert Lytell 4 times. He went 1, 2, and 1 draw. Holman Williams fought Jack Chase 4 times. A perfect record, including a fight April 27, 1944, where Chase was down 4 times and fought with a dislocated jaw from round 6. Chase's left eye was closed in round 8. Holman Williams fought Lloyd Marshall 3 times, going 2-1. When he fought Eddie Booker 3 times, he went 1-1-1. And even though Booker won the fight March 6, 1944, He was forced to retire due to the eye injury sustained. Williams fought Aaron Wade 2 times. He went 2-0, knocking him out in February of 1946. Holman Williams also fought the legendary Archie Moore twice. He went 1-1. From August 1944 to August 1945, he fought 17 times in 7 states, a travel distance of 22,196 miles. The only footage known to exist of Holman Williams is a 15-second clip versus Young Gene Buffalo, dated March 21, 1941, on a Joe Louis undercard. On June 30, 1948, Williams fought his final fight in Trinidad against Daniel James, losing a 10-round decision. Holman Williams never got an opportunity to fight for the middleweight or welterweight world championships. Holman Williams finished his boxing career with 189 fights, 146 wins, 31 losses, 11 draws, and 1 no contest. On July 15, 1967 in Akron, Ohio, someone set fire to Club Wonder, where Holman was working as a maintenance man. He was sleeping and awoke to the club engulfed with fire. He was unable to escape the smoke, collapsing to the floor. He was 52 years old. In 1996, the World Boxing Hall of Fame opened its doors to welcome him, and in 2008, the International Boxing Hall of Fame immortalized his name among the pantheon of boxing greats. Holman Williams has since faded into boxing history as one of the kings of Black Murderers Row. Until now. Lloyd Marshall, aka Black Dynamite, born June 4, 1914 in Madison County, Georgia. He won his first amateur bout in a Golden Glove tournament by knockout on March 6, 1933. He won 2 Golden Glove titles at middleweight in 1934 and 1935. He was trained by Johnny Papke, who fought Harry Greb and taught him fundamentals with an old school style. Lloyd was known as an aggressive counterpuncher who baited opponents with his hands below his waist in constant feints. He punched while you were punching and loved a good shot to the solar plexus. He said, "I never aimed a punch. I tried to always be in position to hit. And if I was in position, I could take advantage of any opening." As an amateur, he competed alongside teenage Joe Louis and Aaron Wade, another member of the Black Murderers Row. This is the story of Lloyd Marshall. Lloyd turned professional September 11, 1936 in San Francisco at Dreamland Auditorium against Al Laboa, losing a 6-round decision. Marshall was managed by Frank Doljak, who played minor league baseball for the Sacramento Solons. At one point in 1937, Lloyd was described as Doljak's quote-unquote manservant and slept under the grandstands on the baseball field. He was practically left to starve and fend for himself, surviving on hot dogs and hamburgers if he could get them. Throughout his career, he fought for a lousy chump change and went through a slew of managers. Most of his fights were fought in California, in cities from San Francisco to Sacramento and Hollywood. On March 31, 1943 in Cleveland, Ohio, Lloyd Marshall destroyed Ezer Charles, aka the Cincinnati Cobra, in front of a crowd of 10,500 plus, knocking him down 8 times. Ezer didn't win a single round. One reporter said Marshall knocked Charles down so often that Charles looked like an overworked elevator operator. He earned a few thousand for that fight. On January 18, 1944 in Cleveland, Ohio, Marshall defeated Nate Bolden by unanimous decision in a 10-rounder for the vacant duration light heavyweight title. Marshall fought most of the kings in Black Murderers Row. On December 11, 1942, Lloyd Marshall defeated Charley Burley, knocking him down on 2 different occasions in the 1st and 4th rounds. The fight took place in Hollywood, and Charley Burley described it as the roughest fight I had. He was a light heavyweight. I lost the decision to him, and he's the only one who knocked me off my feet. A straight right hand in the 1st round. Lloyd Marshall lost to Eddie Booker, and in 3 fights against Jack Chase, he went 1-1-1, including a loss and a draw, both for the USA California State middleweight title. He fought Holman Williams 3 times. He went 1-2. Marshall also fought the great Ezzard Charles 3 times. He went 1-2, stopping Charles in round 8 by TKO in 1943 in Cleveland. Marshall fought Archie Moore twice and lost. On April 21, 1944, Marshall defeated Jake LaMotta by unanimous decision over 10 rounds. Jake received one of the biggest beatings of his career the night he faced Marshall. His face was grotesquely swollen from the pounding. The fight drew nearly $37,000 at the gate. LaMotta pocketed $25,000 and Marshall got just $5,000 in a victory. In June of 1944, Marshall was proclaimed the greatest fighter pound for pound in the world by some publications. On July 27, 1951, Marshall fought his final fight at Civic Ice Arena in Seattle against Harry Matthews, losing by knockout in round 5. Marshall finished his boxing career with 99 fights, 71 wins, 25 losses, 4 draws, and 1 disqualification. After retirement, he began working at McClellan Air Force Base as a sandblaster and then a janitor for the next 30 years. Lloyd told reporters later in life, quote, "When I quit fighting, the money I had was so thin, you could see through it. I wish the Lord could bless me and bring me back now. All these guys do is back up and get $1 million. To tell the truth, it burns me up." In 1983, promoter Larry Atkins said, quote, "Marshall couldn't get fights because he was so good. So he had to lose fights deliberately. He told me he did it because he had to make a living." In retrospect, in 1944, Chief Boxing Inspector and former lightweight champion Willie Ritchie proclaimed that California was the filthiest, dirtiest business I've ever seen, with investigations into gambling and faking in California boxing. In 1940, Marshall rematched Teddy Yaros, a fighter who couldn't punch that he had already beaten. The fight was described by reporters as strange. Marshall seemed to miss his opponent on purpose, and missed when there was no reason to. He fouled Teddy repeatedly and close. Marshall appeared to be rocked by punches that gave him wobbly legs from a fighter whose punches carried about, quote, "as much force as a swinging pocketbook." The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette said, quote, "A good chunk of Uncle Sam's green lettuce is reported to have exchanged hands on the outcome, and that, quote, a certain well-known downtown gambler cut himself in nicely on the advanced allegation." Lloyd Marshall was allegedly told to take a dive. At the time, Lloyd was managed by Eddie Higgins and Teddy was managed by Joe Gold. Lloyd Marshall lost the fight on points. The referee of the fight, Red Robinson, reported to the boxing commissioner, Havy Boyle, after the fight that both boys disregarded the rules and should be penalized. They were both suspended indefinitely in the state of Pennsylvania. In February 1942, the Sacramento Bee newspaper wrote that Marshall fought, quote, "pathetic," against a 3-1 underdog in Eddie Pierce, losing 9 out of 10 rounds. It seemed Marshall was carrying Pierce, who no one expected to go the distance. Marshall still won. In July of 1942 against Al Gilbert, an unknown fighter, referee Toby Irwin threatened to disqualify Marshall, stating, quote, "I worked a lot of fights with Lloyd, and I knew he was not offering his best. He needed to start fighting or be disqualified." Marshall ended up knocking out Gilbert in the 5th round. In March 1946, writer Jim Scott said, quote, "It looked like Marshall went down to Oakland Billy Smith of his own volition." Scott said 2 sources close to the Oakland fight game said Lloyd took a dive. Lloyd was also a 2-1 favorite in that fight. Early in his boxing career, Lloyd Marshall met his wife, Maisie. She was a big part of his life and success. She was known as Ringside Maisie, a fiery woman with Choctaw blood. She once asked reporters before the Ezzard Charles fight, quote, "I was just wondering who is gonna pick Charles up tomorrow night." Lloyd Marshall ended up stopping Ezzard Charles that night. Maisie made sure that Lloyd was retired by the commissions so he couldn't take any further punishment when he became an older fighter. She was always looking out for him and managed the family's money. Marshall always performed better when she attended his fights. She was something like his good luck charm. Lloyd Marshall was inducted to the World Boxing Hall of Fame in 1996 and posthumously inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in June 2010. On August 4, 1997, Lloyd Marshall passed and faded into boxing history as one of the kings of Black Murderers Row. Until now. Hilton Edward Booker, known as Eddie Booker, born November 5, 1917 in Alto, Texas, nicknamed Black Dynamite. The best historical account of a fighter lost in the history books is from the men who shared the ring and exchanged the punches. I've had some rough fights in my time, but all things being equal, when I was in my prime, one of my toughest fights had to have been against Eddie Booker, a fighting machine. Dreaded Eddie Booker, one of the greatest fighters of my time. He had me fighting for dear life. Archie Moore. Listen, this is the story of Hilton Edward Booker. Hilton made his professional boxing debut on January 15, 1935 at Foreman's Arena in San Jose, California against Ray Lewis, winning by first round knockout. Booker continued to fight around Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose, working his record to an outstanding 29-0-1. He developed a reputation for his immovable chin and body-snatching attack. In 1937 and 1938, he was handed 2 controversial draws. One on October 8, 1937 against Jackie Burke. According to boxing historian Eddie Mueller, a writer from the San Francisco Examiner, Booker won at least 6 rounds and should have been given the decision. The second fight, January 14, 1938, a draw against Mickey Duras. The Oakland Tribune and San Francisco Examiner gave Booker 8 out of 10 rounds and publicly denounced the decision. Booker won his next 8 fights, earning a spot on the Joe Louis vs. John Henry Lewis undercard against Black Murderers Row foe Holman Williams. The fight took place January 25, 1939 at Madison Square Garden in New York City and was ruled a draw. Booker fought another king of Black Murderers Row, Herbert Lewis Hardwick, aka Coco Kid, March 9, 1939 in Connecticut, losing a 10-round decision. On May 2nd, 1941, Eddie Booker defeated Shorty Hogue by 10-round decision at the Coliseum in San Diego, winning his first title, the vacant USA California State Middleweight title. Booker would go on to defend the California Middleweight title on 7 different occasions, losing a rematch to Shorty Hogue in his first reign, and in his second reign, losing to Black Murderers Row Jack Chase in 1943. Eddie Booker fought boxing legend Archie Moore 3 times. The first fight, February 21st, 1941, Booker and Moore fought a 10-round draw at the Coliseum in San Diego. The day after, Archie Moore collapsed while raking leaves in his front yard. He felt a red-hot iron had pierced his stomach. He laid on the ground knowing it was Booker's body shots. As his aunt called an ambulance, Moore thought to himself and said, "I was sure that I was dying." Moore suffered a perforated ulcer and required life-saving surgery. It took him 11 months to recover from the effects of Eddie Booker's body-snatching attack. In Booker vs. Moore 2 on December 11, 1942, the fight was once again ruled a draw at the Coliseum in San Diego. Booker would retain the USA California State Middleweight title. In Booker vs. Moore 3 on January 21st, 1944, Eddie TKO'd Archie in the 8th at Legion Stadium in Hollywood, California. Moore was saved by the bell in rounds 6 and 7. It was the first time Archie Moore had been stopped in 60 fights, and the most devastating loss of his career. Moore said, "Eddie Booker was poison to me." At 59 wins, 3 losses, and 7 draws, he fought Black Murderers Row Lloyd Marshall on September 28, 1942 at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco. This was thought to be his truest test yet. Booker defeated Marshall by 10-round decision, earning his 60th career win. After the fight, San Francisco Examiner writer Eddie Mueller stated, quote, "If there's a middleweight in the world who can beat Eddie Booker, we can't name him." During his boxing career, Booker worked as a red-cap porter at the railroad station to make ends meet. Booker fought Black Murderers Row legend Holman Williams in a rematch on November 19, 1943 at the Coliseum Bowl in San Francisco. Williams defeated Booker by 12-round decision. On January 11, 1943 at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco, he was hospitalized with a damaged eye after a defeat to Black Murderers Row Jack Chase, losing his state middleweight title. There is speculation it was due to a doctored glove, while some writers state it was due to a shipyard accident as he helped with the war. The story is that Eddie was working as a mechanic and it left a steel splinter in his left eye. He had 2 operations that removed the splinter. It was also reported to be a detached retina. Still, rumors of an illegal substance having been rubbed on Jack Chase's glove during the fight effectively damaged Booker's eye forever. The operations and medical attention didn't provide a complete recovery, and his eyesight continued to deteriorate. After eye surgery and weeks in the hospital, he faced the possibility of going blind if he continued to fight. The California State Athletic Commission had imposed a prohibition on licensing one-eyed fighters in 1938. Booker felt his boxing career nearing its end. He wore an odd-looking mask while sparring in the gymnasium to protect that eye. Booker finally returned to boxing in August 1943 against Harry Matthews and fought 6 more times after the initial eye injury, a testament to his will and courage. In Eddie Booker's final fight on March 6, 1944, he defeated Holman Williams at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco, concluding their trilogy. The fight earned $11,972 and was talked about for weeks around the Bay Area. Hilton Edward Booker was 26 years old and half blind when he finished his boxing career, with a record of 68 wins, 5 losses, and 8 draws. Booker had 33 knockouts and 33 decisions and was never knocked out. Eddie Booker was ranked at welterweight, middleweight, and light heavyweight from April 1939 to June 1944, as high as number 2 in the world. Yet he never got an opportunity to fight for a world championship. Booker was posthumously inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in June 2017. Later in life, Eddie worked as a hardware store clerk and was still half blind due to eye injuries from his boxing career. On January 26, 1975, at the age of 57, Hilton Edward Booker had a heart attack and passed away at his home in San Francisco, fading into boxing history as one of the kings of Black Murderers Row. Until now. Aaron Wade, known as Little Tiger, born on March 17, 1916 in Trenton, Tennessee. His mother moved the family to Peoria, Illinois in 1923. Little Tiger Wade was known for his 5'5", short, stocky, powerful frame, with wiry arms almost as if he could tie his shoes standing up. He was a ferocious and deadly puncher with both hands. His small and crouching style gave his opponents nightmares. Listen, this is the story of Aaron Little Tiger Wade. Aaron Wade, known as Little Tiger, born on March 17, 1916 in Trenton, Tennessee. His mother moved the family to Peoria, Illinois in 1923. Little Tiger Wade was known for his 5'5", short, stocky frame with wiry arms, almost as if he could tie his shoes standing up. He was a ferocious and deadly puncher with both hands. His small and crouching, powerful style gave his opponents nightmares. Listen, this is the story of Aaron Little Tiger Wade. Wade went into the history books early, becoming Peoria, Illinois' first Black Golden Gloves champion. He fought in over 600 amateur fights and also represented Chicago in national amateur tournaments. He had 2 brothers who boxed. Aaron was known as Little Tiger, while his brothers were known as Big Tiger and Younger Tiger. The Wades all grew up fighting in the local Peoria boxing program and found success in the Golden Gloves. Aaron Wade made his pro debut on August 15, 1935 against Murray Allen, winning by decision. On August 31, 1939, Chuck Vickers arrived in Peoria from Cincinnati, bragging that he'd never been beaten by a Negro. Wade KO'd Vickers in the 3rd round in front of a crowd of 2,500. By 26, his love for pork saw him eat his way out of the welterweight division. His power and style made him one of the most avoided boxers around as he struggled to pay his rent. On March 3, 1943, he got his first taste of the Black Murderers Row when he fought Charley Burley in Oakland at the Auditorium. Wade lost by decision. A few months later, on June 21, 1943, he lost a points decision to Black Murderers Row Jack Chase. And on August 16, 1943, Aaron Wade upset Archie Moore at the Coliseum Bowl in San Francisco. Archie Moore was ranked 5th at the time and dropped to 8th in the rankings after the fight. But Wade's victory was largely ignored, and he never got a ranking by boxing's biggest magazine publications. On December 26, 1943, Aaron Wade was hanging out with Jack Chase, who he'd fought earlier in the year, at a local all-night cafe on Fillmore Street in San Francisco. A gunshot rang out, and Wade emerged bleeding. Jack Chase had shot him in the shoulder. Chase claimed it was an accident as the gun discharged while he was reaching in his pocket for cigarettes. Chase was arrested and held at city prison for assault with intent to commit murder, possession of a deadly weapon, and filing the serial numbers off his .32 caliber pistol, while Wade went to the hospital. Chase was released eventually without conviction. In Aaron Wade's return to boxing on March 24, 1944 at the Coliseum in San Diego, he once again fought Charley Burley and lost the decision. On June 28, 1944, Aaron Wade got the opportunity to make Jack Chase pay for what was called an accidental shooting. Wade thrashed Chase for 10 rounds straight before being temporarily blinded in the final round. Wade's optic nerve had been paralyzed, and he claimed that he could not see, and the fight was stopped. Reports indicate that either Jack Chase landed a lucky punch or Wade was healed, meaning Chase had used the lace part of his glove to damage his eye. Either way, Wade lost by TKO in the final round. The third fight with Chase a few months later resulted in a draw. Aaron Wade versus Archie Moore II was scheduled for October 15th at St. Nichols Arena. On October 10th, Moore pulled out, claiming he had food poisoning. Instead, Wade fought Holman Williams of the Black Murderers Row in Oakland on October 11, 1944. Wade would lose a decision. That same month in October 1944, he used his prize money and opened a nightclub, which featured an orchestra and plenty of liquor. 3 days later, it was raided by police for operating without a liquor license. Wade ended up paying a fine in court. And on November 13, 1944, he defeated Herbert Hardwick, aka Coco Kid, by decision at the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco. In 1945, Wade was subpoenaed to court after suspicions of main event fighters being bribed to fix fights around the Bay Area. On April 11, 1945, he testified before a grand jury and showed up at District Attorney Edmund Brown's office the next day announced. Wade told Brown, quote, "If the investigation of the crooked fights were dropped, he would guarantee there would be no more fixed fights on this side of the bay." District Attorney Brown declined and continued the investigations. When the owner of the Brown Bomber Dance Hall in Fillmore, San Francisco was indicted, Wade left his family behind and traveled east. He never fought on the West Coast again. On August 11, 1945, Wade knocked out Mario Ochoa on the Jake LaMotta undercard at Madison Square Garden in front of 15,000 people. He'd been inactive for months, lost his last few fights, and never even fought on the East Coast or New York prior. A week later, he fought Charley Burley a third time in Pittsburgh at the Forbes Field. He lost again by decision. October 1st, 1945, Little Tiger Wade fought Bert Lytell at the Coliseum in Baltimore, winning a split decision by his barest whisker. Wade would rematch Holman Williams February 4th, 1946 in New York at the St. Nichols Arena. He lost by knockout. Little Tiger Wade had a well-known drinking problem and admitted to his son decades later that he'd fought at least 2 fights while drunk. He cursed out the New York Athletic Commission and reportedly spoiled his shot at a title. He wouldn't fight for another 2 years. On December 9, 1948, welterweight champion Sugar Ray Robinson was forced to pull out of a fight with Steve Belois. Robinson had sustained an injury in training. Sugar Ray Robinson made a statement to the press saying, quote, "It happened in the last minute of my 3-round workout with Tiger Wade here on Monday. Aaron Wade's a 170-pounder. He hit me with the right uppercut down here. I felt like he stabbed me with a knife." Sugar Ray Robinson's 6th and 7th rib were separated according to doctors. But that wasn't the end of the story. Reporter Gary Hearn of the Boston Post, however, found this to be a lie from Sugar Ray, stating, quote, "There was nothing accidental about Robinson's rib separation." Published in an article Friday, December 10, 1948. Hearn went on to say, quote, "It was the result of trying to shave the overhead a little bit, his own personal overhead, for the fight. Here's what happened. Robinson and Wade sparred the previous Tuesday at the Uptown Gymnasium. Robinson, feeling the pinch of the lagging ticket sales for his fight Thursday, told Wade that he would have to accept less money than promised. Wade objected at first, then relented. Quote, "What can I do about it? You're the boss. I've got to take it." But he didn't. Aaron Wade left the gym and came back. He waited outside for Sugar Ray Robinson after training, on the sidewalk. When Robinson came out, Wade confronted him. Quote, "I want all the dough or none. I'm just a punk in this business, but I want my money." According to the story told to reporter Gary Hearn, Ray Robinson told Aaron Wade, quote, "You would be lucky to get anything." And before Ray could finish his words, Aaron Wade fired his Sunday punch that knocked Robinson to the sidewalk and then gave him a brisk going over. But that wasn't the end of their story. On February 22nd, 1950, Wade fought Sugar Ray Robinson at the Municipal Auditorium in Savannah, Georgia. It was his final fight. He was acting as a replacement after Robinson's scheduled opponent was shot in New Orleans. Wade hadn't fought in nearly 800 days, and promoters knew he needed the money. Wade fell 5 times in the second round. The third time he fell, Ray's glove missed Wade and he still went down. He was knocked out by Sugar Ray in the third with little resistance. The Savannah Evening Press was suspicious of Robinson's victory. Quote, "The Tiger, let's call him Aaron, began hitting the canvas for apparently no reason at all. As Robinson moved within firing range, the husky Wade repeatedly fell to the canvas. Waldo Spence, sports editor for the Press, got right to the point. Quote, Robinson never during the evening hit Wade with a solid punch. Years later, Wade privately confirmed what many thought they saw that night. He told his son Alan he had taken a dive. When his son asked him, did Sugar Ray know that he'd taken a dive, Aaron said Robinson had nothing to do with it. Alan said that promoters had approached his father Aaron, quote, they told him to go down in 3 rounds for a few $100s. Wade had asked the promoters if he could go down in 5 or 6, and they declined, and were firm on 3 rounds. Struggling with alcoholism to the point he was paralyzing drunk and down on his luck, Aaron Wade pleaded to God and turned his life around to Jesus Christ. He became a deacon before becoming a reverend. He returned to San Francisco in 1968 and met up with longtime boxing writer and friend Eddie Mueller. who helped Wade get a job working in a warehouse of a wine company. Little Tiger Wade would get free bottles of wine but never drank them. He was reformed now and would give the bottles away. But he never gave up pork. He would still be spotted at Italian clubs dining on his favorite meals. By the 1970s, Little Tiger Wade was now Reverend Aaron Wade. He was a pastor now at the Anchor Rescue Mission in San Francisco. Reverend Wade led Sunday sermons, praying meetings, and Bible study classes weekly. One day, after he'd been retired many years from boxing, he got a mysterious phone call. The caller asked, "Are you an old-time boxer?" Aaron said, "I was." The caller asked, "Did you fight Eddie Booker?" Wade said no. The caller asked, "Did you fight a guy named Charley Burley?" Wade told the caller, "I have." "How about Archie Moore?" responded the caller. Wade said, "I beat Moore." Then the caller asked, "Who was the better fighter, Burley or Moore?" Wade replied, "Why, of course, Burley." The caller burst into laughter and said, quote, "This is Archie Moore talking." Aaron Little Tiger Wade finished his boxing career with 64 wins, 16 losses, and 6 draws. He had a 50% knockout ratio. On February 15, 1985, he punched out from work at the wine warehouse. His co-workers waited for him to take him to his own retirement party. When he didn't emerge for some time, they went back inside to check on him. Wade was down and on the floor. He was transported to the local hospital where he was pronounced deceased at the age of 68, fading into the boxing history books as one of the kings of Black Murderers Row. Until now. The Black Murderers Row head-to-head record stands as follows. They fought each other 62 times. Now, we speak and remember their names. The 8 black pugilists denied the glory of being called world champion. They rose from poverty, fighting for survival, mastering their craft inside the squared circle of boxing. Each paved the way for the next generation, so when the final bell tolls on their unfulfilled dreams, their only will and testament is to be among the greats for eternity. Charley Burley, Holman Williams, Herbert Hardwick, Bert Lytell, Aaron Wade, Eddie Booker, Lloyd Marshall, Jack Chase. They never identified themselves as Black Murderers Row. So on CHAMPSIDE, let's recognize them as champions.